Welcome. We're talking about PTA insurance. Why do you need it? What do we offer? And some good things to know about how to protect your organization. My name is Jamie Fagan. I'm the president at AIM Insurance. Just a little bit about AIM. We started insuring PTAs in 1989. Today, we insure over 23,000 organizations nationwide, and it's still all that we do. We really take pride in understanding the ins and outs of running a PTA and the risks involved. So with that, let's get started. So why does your group need insurance? To protect the assets of the PTA and personal assets of its members. Oftentimes, if a PTA is held liable, the PTA will be sued, and depending on the severity of the loss, the member could be sued personally. So one great thing about insurance is that it steps in not only for the PTA, but for an individual, one of your members who is personally sued. Anyone can sue for any reason, and they usually do. We live in a very litigious society, so it happens. We have lots of frivolous lawsuits. PTAs are not immune from liability. This is a common misconception, and it just isn't true. Typically, school insurance does not cover PTAs. This is another misconception that, oh, the school covers me. And in certain circumstances, the school will have limited coverage, but in most cases, the school is not going to cover your bounce houses. It doesn't cover your loss of funds. It doesn't cover your personal property usually. There's lots of scenarios where the school does not cover, and in many, many cases, doesn't cover anything. So good reason to have insurance. And lastly, insurance will pay to defend you. So attorney fees are very expensive, and sometimes even if it's a frivolous lawsuit, your PTA has to defend itself. So having insurance for, a couple $100s a year more than pays for attorney fees if you have to defend yourself, even in the case where you were not at fault and it was just a frivolous lawsuit. So what kind of insurance should you consider? So at AIM, we offer 4 main types of insurance to PTAs. We'll go into these in more detail, but they are event insurance, otherwise known as general liability. We offer a few supplements under the general liability, which we'll learn more about, and that is extended medical payments and media liability. The second coverage is embezzlement or bond insurance. This protects your money. Third is directors and officers liability and property insurance. So as I said, we'll go ahead and get started talking about these. What does event insurance protect your PTA from? So general liability. It protects you from lawsuits resulting from bodily injury and property damage. These are really mostly for your events. There's a lot of reasons why general liability would come into play, but for a PTA, it's usually for one of your events. Who needs protection under general liability? The named insured, which is your organization, so the name of your PTA, your members, your volunteers, and your employees should all be covered under a general liability policy. We highlight this because you may not buy insurance from AIM, but it's important that you look for a policy that has coverage for all of these people. You'll note policy limits. The starting out limit for general liability at AIM is $1 million, and we highly suggest that you look for a policy that has at least $1 million in general liability limit. Oftentimes, the school districts will require this minimum, but it's something to look for as you shop for insurance. Activities that could cause you liability. You may assume, but here's a good list of activities you may do. So bounce houses, babysitting, carnivals, meetings. Sometimes you may say, well, we don't hold a lot of events, but you do hold a board meeting. So we've had plenty of claims where someone tripped going into the school to have a board meeting, and that loss was covered. And you don't think of it as an event, but it is. So again, all of these listed are covered events, and there's many, many more. We like to remind you throughout that typically your school's insurance does not cover this. So it's always a good idea to, if you think your school provides insurance, to give them a list of your activities like bounce houses, everything that you see here, babysitting, and say, do you cover this? And I think in almost all scenarios, you will find that you are having events that are not covered by the school. Activities that are not covered. These are pretty standard under a general liability policy, but just to highlight a few: auto coverage unless otherwise endorsed, watercraft, general liability is not workers' compensation, fireworks are not covered, mechanical rides, aircraft, and organized sports. I will note in regards to organized sports, this is the basketball team, the football team. If your PTA is putting on an event where it's, a faculty versus kids basketball game or something like that, we don't consider it an organized sport. We are specifically excluding the basketball team and the football team and established school teams like that. Let's talk about extended medical payments. This is an endorsement under the GL. Most GL policies have a medical payments component that is separate from the bodily injury component. Our policy has $5,000 standard per occurrence. So if a child's hurt at an event, there's no suit, you just want to step in and help pay for those medical bills, you can file a claim and there's a $5,000 limit. We offer the extended medical payments if you want to increase this limit. So extra high-risk events, if you're having bounce houses multiple times a year, or events that you think you might incur some additional medical payment loss, it's something to think about. This coverage extends to volunteers and attendees, which is really important. So if one of your volunteers is hurt conducting your event, you can easily access $5,000 in medical payments or an increased limit if you purchase it. Why is the medical payments coverage important? It provides the higher option if you have more high-risk events, and it also deters lawsuits. So this is really important. If a child is hurt and the family can't afford to pay the medical bills, one of the first things they're going to look to is, well, can we sue the PTA to help us with these medical bills? So if you already have coverage that steps in immediately and starts paying for those medical bills, you're a lot less likely to have a suit, which is wonderful, and you really want to avoid that. How do you determine if you need a higher medical limit? So as I said, $5,000 is automatically included, and this is per occurrence. So $5,000 per child injured or per person injured. And the answer is that every PTA is different. You just have to consider what type of activities you're doing. If you're really just having a few board member meetings a year, probably not something you need to consider. If you, as I said, are having, multiple bounce houses and, inflatables and things that you tend to see more injury with, you definitely want to consider it. We offer up to $50,000 limit. You can always call us and talk about what limit you should be considering. Media liability. This is another endorsement under general liability. And this is somewhat new. This has come about by popular demand. We are seeing more liability related to website and social media. What's happening is, PTAs are posting photos without getting a release or using trademarks. For instance, you have an event and you cater McDonald's or Chick-fil-A and you use their logo without permission, or misrepresentation of information. So you put something on your website that you thought was correct or seemed clear, but it was misinterpreted and someone held you liable for that information. Or making confidential information public. Names, addresses, things that may have seemed harmless that you put on your website or on your social media, and someone holds you liable for that personal information. So we've got a list of some typical types of media included, pretty much anything you can think of in terms of social media and your website. So let's move on to talk about embezzlement insurance, otherwise known as crime or bond insurance. So how does embezzlement insurance protect your PTA? So embezzlement insurance protects the cash and the money of your PTA against embezzlement, robbery, or theft. This is a good time to note that general liability used to be our most common claim, and embezzlement has really taken a slim lead. We're seeing a lot of embezzlement claims. The frequency there is much higher than it's ever been. So who should be covered under embezzlement insurance? Sometimes you will see policies that are only a position bond or versus a blanket bond, meaning that they only cover your treasurer. You really want to look for a policy that's a blanket bond, meaning that it covers anybody who handles your money. So if you have a volunteer who collects money at the entrance of a carnival, that person goes and deposits the money. That money is covered while it is in the volunteer's hands. It doesn't have to be the treasurer or the president. The fraud triangle. We like to talk about this because a lot of groups think that embezzlement won't happen to them. So the way that embezzlement usually happens is we talk about opportunity, motivation, and rationalization. So someone has access to the money, that's the opportunity, whether it's the treasurer or someone close to the organization. The motivation, maybe they can't pay their electricity bill this month, or they just need a little extra help. So they think, well, there's plenty of money in the bank account, I'll take it. And then they rationalize it by saying, as soon as I get caught up financially, I'll put the money back. And oftentimes, it's not a malicious thing. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes it's just someone borrowing from the PTA who doesn't have the ability to pay it back. So a big reason why embezzlement insurance is important. So how can you protect your PTA from an embezzlement loss? We have a couple of standard things that we like to recommend. So obviously have a checking account that requires 2 signatures on checks. Whenever that's possible, we really recommend it. The next 2 are required under the AIM policy, which is have someone who does not have a check signing authority review your bank statements monthly. This is really important. And we've had lots of units who have come to us and said, we started doing this, we caught it. We didn't have a loss because of that, and it was wonderful. So thank you for reminding us to do this monthly. So it's very important. The next one is conducting an annual audit of the books by either an audit committee or a qualified accountant. This is also required under the AIM policy. We get a lot of questions about, well, what's an audit committee? And this is really 2 or more people organized for the purpose of auditing your books at the end of the year. Both of those things, monthly checks into your bank statements and an annual audit. That will help you a ton. How much coverage do you need? Each PTA has to determine their own level of coverage, but what we recommend is using the safe practice, which is match your limit to your annual budget, your revenues. Usually, some PTAs will say that, well, we never have more than, $5,000 or $10,000 in our bank account. But what happens is sometimes people, take money over a long period of time. We hope we catch that with reviewing statements and things like that, but it's not always caught. So if someone, takes $1,000 or $2,000 a month, it could really add up, and we see that happen. So again, looking at bond limits, match this to your annual revenues. So why does your PTA need directors and officers liability? Directors and officers are protected in the case of lawsuits resulting in wrongful acts or inappropriate actions. This is another one where it seems like it might not happen to you, but what we see most often with directors and officers liability claims is that it's a very well-meaning officer or director that is doing what they think is absolutely best for the organization, and somebody takes issue with it. It's usually not a malicious thing. They made the best choice and somebody took an issue with it. So we'll go down the list of things that are covered under the directors and officers. So inappropriate use of the PTA funds, misleading statements, wrongful or negligent acts, discrimination, not following your bylaws, or misrepresentation. We see most often, again, that it falls under a wrongful act that someone took in the best interest of the organization. I'll give you a good example. There was a PTA who had a member meeting, and they had a particular member who tended to get unruly. They had security on site in case that individual got out of hand. That happened, and they instructed security to remove the individual so that didn't create any harm to any of the other members, and just, remove them, trying to do the best thing for the other members. The individual sued for a violation of civil rights. So perfect example of that board member thought they were doing the absolute right thing to protect their membership, and they probably were, but this person took issue, and the directors and officers coverage had to step in to defend the PTA. There's a few exceptions that we just like to note: knowingly wrongful acts, dishonesty, criminal acts, and reckless behavior. So those are not the normal of what we see with our losses, but they are exceptions under the policy. Property insurance. This protects personal property owned by the PTA from loss or damage due to an accident, theft, or natural disaster. This is not insurance for your building or a structure. Some PTAs say, well, we don't own any real property, but this is business personal property. We'll talk a little bit more about the types of things, but fundraising, merchandise, things like that. And again, the reminder that your school does not usually cover this. So if you have items that your PTA owns, it's good to consider this insurance. The types of property that are typically protected, like I said, fundraising merchandise, popcorn machines, auction items, tables and chairs, raffle items, even if they're only in your possession for a short time, they can be stolen. You would, have that liability. So it's good to have the property insurance if you possess any type of property that's worth any substantial amount. And that is actually wraps up the types of coverage that we offer here at AIM. So I encourage you, if you have any other questions, contact us at AIM. Our website is listed along with our phone number. I mentioned that our whole team is dedicated to parent-teacher organizations. So we love to talk about it. We take a lot of pride in it, and we encourage you to contact us with any questions about the insurance you already have, the insurance you might need, and how to protect your organization. So thank you.